Hello, everybody. I'm here with Mr. Ryan Summers. It's been a while. We've been discussing the possibility to talk about philosophical, deep topics about motion design. So here we are. And initially, we had recorded already an episode when we were at Camp Mograph while escaping mosquitoes and walking around the camp. Sadly, we set up badly the recorder or talked too loud. I don't know. We got carried away by our emotions.
We probably got very excited, I would imagine.
And the recording sucks. So here we are recording it again. So
the second time's always better, right? Hello, sir. Yeah. It's good to see you. Should we pipe in some crickets or like some wind or something rustling in the background to capture the I did love the ambience. I love the ambience of just like being out in a field while there's just like people in every direction, but just soft in the background. It was an epic little location.
Yeah, I will add some sound design and even some mosquito sounds. So, like we can feel the bites again.
Just slapping. Yeah, the sound of you slapping your arm or your leg. Those mosquito bites stuck, man. I feel like for a week and a half later, I was still like, why am I still itching? What's going on? They were hardcore down in Chicago.
Yeah. So, Ryan, I will ask the same question I asked you at camp, but I think it's not a bad thing we are re-recording because I think after our recording, we went to that talk with Brandon Parvini.
Yeah, Brandon Parvini, Mr. Parvini.
Yeah, and other discussions followed after that, and I think our answer now is going to be maybe more interested and more fleshed out. Because it was pure chaos.
Yeah, we have to set the stage. Like we had a deep introspective discussion right before a fireside chat, and then this chat went for, I think, 4.5 to 5 hours deep into the night.
Yeah,
and I lost count of how many times you and I just looked at each other and was like, was Brandon listening to us that whole time we were recording? Because it was like he's saying out loud the things we're like in hushed tones in the middle of a field talking over. So it was nice to hear the affirmation. I think a little bit.
Yeah, and I have proof. I have the original recording in case people don't believe it. I have proof. It sounds bad, but yeah, we have proof. So let's get started. Ryan, as an industry or as even artists in the motion design field, what have we become?
I think it's fun doing this after camp because I feel like every time I ask that question and include the word artists, it's always interesting to add that at the end because I think it ruffles feathers, at least in our motion design industry sometimes. Sometimes people react where they're like, well, I don't think I'm an artist, or I'm a designer, or I work on a computer. I'm not an artist. And I think it's starting to get to the core of why we're seeing certain things bubbling up through all the different echo chambers, right? Like there's other podcasts, there's Slacks, there's Discords, used to be Twitter. But I feel like there's a growing level of discomfort or frustration, and it pops up in imposter syndrome. It pops up in, the friction that even at camp was starting. You could start seeing it in very friendly ways. Camp is amazing because it's very friendly and very positive, but you could feel it kind of bubbling up. And it's definitely shown up in my conversations. I do these open office hours, and I've been doing them, I think, for 7 years. I think I'm over 1,000 meetings, little 15, 20-minute meetings. And I'm starting to see this kind of consistent pattern of people who are mid-career or maybe even a little bit later, not retirement age, but on the back half of their career. And there's just this feeling of discontent. It's not where I thought I would be, or I'm thinking about getting out, or I'm not feeling the same way I used to feel. And a lot of times I think it gets put on work-life balance, or it gets put on everybody's teaching everybody stuff for free, and how dare they, teach people the stuff that I had to spend my hard-earned money and time to learn. But I think there's an underlying thread that we all got into this for a reason that we got disconnected from, and it's hard to go back to it. And I think a lot of it is a lot of people got in because they loved something, right? I'm looking at your bookshelf and my bookshelf, and they might have loved comic books or animation or video games or cartoons or something before motion design was a thing that you could go to school to get a 4-year degree in. We found ourselves in this industry by hook or by crook somehow, right? And I'm a flag waving, card carrying cheerleader for motion design as a thing in capital capital letters, right? But at the same time, I think overall, the industry is starting to lose a little bit of its connection to its art or its interest in art or its kind of artful nature. And you probably have some better ways to say it in a shorter, tighter version. But I think the industry kind of had this like Wild West stage for a couple of years during COVID. And it curiously came at the same time that I'm guilty of it because I was there. A lot of people teaching tools in a fairly inexpensive or at least accessible way. At the same time, hardware was easy to get your hands on. Software was easy to get your hands on. And the industry started to kind of calcify around motion design is After Effects plus Cinema 4D. And it's these 4 or 5 or 6 kind of looks or feels, which we've always had trends, but we haven't really like moved on to the next ones in the last little time. I feel like we've seen a lot of the like, you either got like the Nando Costa Microsoft, you got the Ariel Costa, like the two Costas, kind of bipolar, like opposing forces, but like the kind of like twitchy, everything on twos, posterized time, kind of collage style. We still got, like circles and squares with glows and like noisy gradients, is kind of like a thing. Explainer videos with corporate Memphis. There's these kind of like tent poles that we haven't like moved on from or expanded or like developed. And it's curious because it comes almost at the same time to me that like we don't have as many like names for better or for worse. I hate the term rock star or art ninja or whatever stupid terms people use, but there used to be like a constant kind of like generational shift of like, oh, everybody wants to aim for a Kyle Cooper or a Danny Yount, and that has its positives and negatives. But like it almost feels like we stopped at Patrick Clare and Raoul Marx, and I don't feel like there's been a big push for like what was that other person I want to emulate or that studio that I want to be like. And I think there's some positives to that, but at the same time, I feel like that always came with like people admiring the art or the not just the methods, but the reasons behind the decision making that created those trends or those looks. And I just feel like as there's more and more people coming in, there's less discussion or interest about that. I don't know if that's how you feel, but I guess, yeah, the TLDR for it is like, where's the art? What's going on, guys? Everybody, where are the art discussions happening?
Yeah, I have a couple takes on the things you just mentioned. I will open with like my reply to what you said about like the word artist. And it's funny enough that you're wearing like a motion design hotline hat, because the next day after we recorded our thing at camp, I also recorded a podcast that is going to be released soon with Kyle Hamrick from Motion Design Hotline. And as soon as we started recording, he opened the discussion saying, "Yeah, I'm a technical guy." He was like already defining himself as like the plumber of motion design in a way.
Right.
And what I did is like I refused that acknowledgement. Mm-hmm. I said like, you know what, like probably what you're teaching online and the way you built your community is around technical thing, but you have an artistic sensitivity. Mm-hmm. You are sensitive to different forms of art. So which one, like, tell me which one is yours? Mm-hmm. And funny enough, like he tried to elude many times the question, like going sideways. And but finally he came to this moment that was quite like emotive and strong, where he started talking about Bob Ross. Mm-hmm. And he said like, this might sound cliche or kitsch or like, but in a way, like there was something in what Bob Ross was doing that like was deeply talking to him. And so like I would say like it's a word that has been bastardized a lot, and some people, like some elite, I don't like the word elites, but like some groups tend to like take ownership of that, and if you're not in that trend or in that thing, you're not an artist. Yeah. But like I would say to everybody, to every motion design artist out there that takes this craft seriously, in one way or another, you are an artist. It doesn't matter if you're grandiose or not. Doesn't matter. Not everybody's destined to become a superstar, and that's okay. That's totally fine. Otherwise, who's going to make those explainers?
And also, what's a superstar? You know, like in motion design, it's like it's such a weird. It's funny how I just lamented the fact that there aren't, you know, superstars, and now I'm like slagging off the idea. But more, it's more for me like there are people who push the industry forward, right? It's just like you have tons of comic books on your shelf. It's like we probably grew up around the same time. You know, like there are the Jim Lees or the Mike Mignola's of the world where it's like everybody kind of coalesces around them and they try to deconstruct it or copy it or learn the lessons from it and infuse some of that kind of whatever, the interest or obsession or just like affinity for something they're doing as artists. And I feel like we used to have that. There were those discussions where people are like, how did you do that? Or why did you do it? Or, oh man, I want to do that, but I want to do it with this other color palette. Or I want to do that, but combining live action. And I feel like at the same time that there's been this like hustle culture and like be your own studio as a freelancer and all these like business hacks and thought leaders kind of in the industry, that has taken up so much of the air.
My next points.
Yeah, it's almost like we took notes before. But like that is stealing a lot of the oxygen that used to be consumed by people talking about the work, right? And now it's talking about how to make the work more efficient or how to make more money making the work or getting booked, which is important. And I'm glad we're starting to have those discussions because I think the industry has a certain amount of growing up in terms of like the way we run our business as an actual business and not just like a curious hobby. I think that's important, but I also don't think that that's like to the exclusion of talking about like, man, I love this thing that Matt Voice is doing. Why is Matt Voice's text animation so compelling to me? Is it because of the colors? Is it because the animation language? Is it, you know, how he is always using overlap? Like what is it about that creates this affinity that everybody wants to copy, but nobody really can because he has this like kind of calling card or signature style? I don't even see those discussions happening anymore. And I don't know if it's because it's not encouraged or there isn't a place to see it anymore. You know, like we don't congregate anywhere. We don't have a site of record. You know, as an industry, it's a very weird place to not have one area where we celebrate or spotlight or lift up new people, right? We don't celebrate old work. A lot of times the work is done so quickly that it's out in the world for less time than it took to make it. You know, like that's a problem in the industry. You don't even know where to go to find something that's interesting or new. So yeah, I feel like there's all those other extenuating circumstances, but it gets back to what you're saying. Like, I think there is a level of like imposter syndrome or like, no, I'm not an artist, right? Like it makes me laugh because I can hear Kyle saying that, but at the same time, like Kyle has such a sensitivity to type and to color.
Oh, dude, he's
and, you know, like, and maybe he thinks of it as like meat and potatoes, you know, just like I just do what people tell me. But I look at his work and I definitely think that he has like a thing that like ties a lot of the stuff he makes together. Maybe he doesn't value it as much as like somebody might value another person's, but he definitely has like a thread that feels like an artist's kind of voice or vision.
Yeah, and what I told him also is like, I'm going to like jump back and forth into different things, but like when he told me that at some point in that podcast, I told him like, you know what, like the spaces where young people can experiment and talk about some things are kind of like disappearing. It's something that you're mentioning now. And the work you've been doing has been allowing in some way or another for that space to exist for beginners. But it doesn't matter if those are beginners. I mean, to me, that's like a crucial moment of your career when you're starting to have like a place that feels like safe to experiment. And, you know, like you mentioned the hustle culture, which started like, to me, like the climax of the hustle culture happened during COVID. So COVID in a way was great because it like banged open the doors of work in motion designs for everybody around the world. So that was incredible. But then also appeared this whole hustle culture. If you're not like hustling in like 10 different things, learning 4 different softwares at the same time and reading 10 books, like you're nowhere.
I mean, do you get hit with those Instagram ads where they're like, if you're not making $10,000 a month as a motion designer, you're doing it wrong. Like, I feel like that's something that's just recently popped up as well. It's like the place where you're going for inspiration is now being infiltrated by this like imposter leaning kind of like messaging. Even there, your safe space is like being infiltrated by it. And you get it from all directions now.
So everybody, you know, those things generally cause depression. And I know like people, like a lot of people will tell you, I'm not going through depression. But there's different levels of depression. Or being burned out. You can be heavily burned out or you can be lightly burned out. And I know that at some point, like even myself, I got like saturated of like all the people telling you how to succeed in life, all the things you need to do. So I think also like part of like there's a whole segment in the creative industry, probably more the old timers, that are kind of like a little bit burned out. You know, like it's a little bit of like a saturation. And I will tie that, you know, like with what you were saying. You were talking about the calcification. Is our sector has become more institutionalized, I believe. It has become official, if you want, in a way. So now motion design is on the map. People know what it is. Companies use it every day to communicate, to social media, whatever they want. So it has become more like an industry. Like the film industry is like stratified, and you know, you have all this organization in it. And that has like broken the spaces where you could jam. And the same thing happened with the music industry. So in parts of the music industry, you could go to a bar and there was Eric Clapton playing, not on a stage where you couldn't like talk to him. And then next to him, like you have Jimi Hendrix with his guitar, just waiting to get on stage and say like, hey guys, you don't know me, but I just flew from the US. I want to jam with you guys.
Yeah. And Hendrix Hendrix has a Dylan song in his head, and the Beatles are in the crowd listening to him play, and they're like, oh no, we got to step up, right? Like those are all things that happened, right?
Exactly. So you could cross people and you could like talk. And I would say we are lucky enough that in the motion design industry, these spaces like, for example, Camp Mograph still exist in a way. But for example, if you take the counterpart, which is off, for example, in Barcelona, sure, you will meet a lot of the people that is sitting in the like on the chairs next to you. But most of the artists that are presenting, they have their own VIP zone, and they don't, you know, like some of them decide to mix with the crowd, but like a lot of them then are, because it's organized like that, is like are separated, and that breaks the opportunity to jam, to like cross each other's like we had with Parvini, with PJ from the Laundry, where we end up like talking until like 2 a.m. all of us, you know.
And no one wanted to stop, right? Like it was
and we stopped because we were tired, we were thirsty, and people had to pee. But I mean, but honestly, like, and I think those places where you can jam are like vital, because first of all, it to me it breaks the superstar cycle. I don't believe in superstars. Like even if you're the Pope, I would talk to you as a human being, and I'm not gonna be like on my knees, you know, like. Even if you're the president, I don't care. You're a human being, and we're equal. And so those places allow to those discussions to happen, and realize that, well, this guy that made it, or at least you think he made it, is in fact still today with his big company and all his success struggling with clients. He's still getting feedback and all those things. And so that's part to me like of the disconnect also, is having the accessibility. Because a lot of people will tell you, yeah, you can reach everybody online. People are nice. They will reply. Sure. But everybody's busy. You know, everybody has like a crazy life, hustle culture, all the things. And most of those messages or emails stay unanswered. And it's not because these people are like bad people. It's just life. And these spaces like create that like timeless vacuum where whatever work you have, not a problem. Whatever calls you had, they're gone. This is a moment we're here to talk all together and jam. You know, like,
That's what I found so interesting about the Parvini fireside chat. The most interesting stuff was after he wore us down with like 3.5 hours of like straight talk, and the speakers got turned down and everybody just kind of got together. That's where the gold really was, because I feel like PJ from Laundry is even feeling this. That's where we really realized. You just mentioned, you know, like the old timers are starting to feel burnt out. I think what was eye-opening to everybody is that the people just getting into the industry are almost as burnt out as we are. And sometimes it's probably hard for people like us to feel because we've got 20 years under our belt and we've seen stuff and we're wondering where it's going to go. But I think because you have people coming up I try to remind myself all this time. That was a really good reminder of like, it was funny how it kind of turned into like West Side Story, Jets and Sharks, where the studio side old hands were on one side of the fireside chat and then all the freelancers were on the other. And it was like, if you came from like off the hill and we're looking, it's like, those guys are going to rumble. But it just kind of worked that way. But it was interesting to see where, we think we're burnt out. And then I'm trying to remind myself and hear like, there's people who are coming up that can't find work, that are inundated with Instagram and Behance and all these other places showing only the best of all the other people around them. So there's just this crushing like ego blow of like, I'm never going to be as good. How do I even get started? There's more tools than there ever were before, and people don't know which one to invest what time in. And we're in this world where we had this crazy moment where there was tons of work. So imagine you came into the industry 3 or 4 years ago, fresh out of school, or you taught yourself on YouTube, and there's work everywhere, and you're getting paid a rate that you never thought was possible just because of the flow of the industry. And then because of nothing you did, right? Like we have nothing to do with like banking crisis or ZERP or, the climate change and politics and all the stuff that's affecting the general economy. But because of nothing motion design did, all of a sudden there's nowhere near as much work. It's highly competitive, probably more than ever has been. And people are asking you to drop your rates. And the behavior most of the time is like you get ghosted or you get put on like a warm body spam hold. All of those things like are a different type of burnout, but it's the same kind of equal, like kind of like mental burden that these people are kind of carrying. That was, I think, really eye-opening to me and Brandon and you and PJ that were there, where that whole idea, like we don't ever get to have those conversations as people. Like we get to see it, we know about it, but like hearing about it. And then the converse, the freelancers hearing that all the things they're complaining about are the same things we as studio people are complaining about our clients. Like, yeah, man, we're not getting paid. We're getting paid 90 days out. We are reaching out to 50 different clients that we used to work with, and 2 of them call back. Or people have jobs and they request like work, and then they ghost. And it was really interesting to almost see, by airing out our grievances, from like kind of aimed at each other, how like both sides got really close to each other. Like, both in terms of talking about stuff, but even physically, you could feel the group getting tighter around like the fire, like the fireside thing. And it was like, oh, wow, like this needs to not happen at like 4 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night amongst just the people who were crazy enough to stay up, right? Like these conversations need to happen out in the open and more often, and allow more people to stand up and say like, we hear you and we're not trying to ghost you all, but we don't have money coming in. Our jobs aren't, we're spending 50% more just trying to find the jobs. And then the jobs come in with like less money and more time. And we need to hear from them. Like I just applied to 20 different places and I heard from no one, places I used to work with. I think that kind of community, that like community at its core also has the word commune together, like people literally getting together and sharing. I don't think that happens. I think there's a lot of talking at people through social media. Like it's great to have like the ability to connect. But like you said, like it's very different sending an email or doing a LinkedIn DM versus like having this conversation. And this kind of conversation is really different from being in the same physical space with 100 people, all like throwing it around, right? Like you said, jamming. That's the part that's missing. And I think it's easy for these like hustle culture and thought leader and, like talking about techniques instead of about the art. It's easy for that stuff to settle in and become like the normal if we don't have Camp Mographs or more opportunities for that stuff to happen.
Yeah. I would say like, regarding, I will go back to this artist idea and the hustle culture and all those things. Is a lot of the young people nowadays are learning over internet, right? And which is totally fine. Most of the learning you will find on the internet is purely technical. So you will learn how to use After Effects. You will learn how to use Cinema 4D. Like all those are tools. Mm-hmm. But like there's very few courses or that teach you like what maybe an art school teaches you, which is this great painter from the 17th century.
Oh my God, dude.
Photography or sculpting or how to print yourself with an old press. Like all those foundational elements. And this is not a rant at all. I'm not saying like it wasn't better before. No, not at all. I'm just saying we are lacking in the digital space something that gives to these young artists, motion designers, let's call it whatever we want, these like roots that go deep, and then not only like, because you can get inspired by stuff, but instead of like copying, is taking it, absorbing it, making it your own, combining with other things,
Yep.
and then output something that is like your voice. And what I'm seeing is like a lot of people, and I had a discussion with like the son of a friend of mine. He's into music, and he's composing stuff, and then he sent me like a lot of random links, and all of his tracks were this type of music in the style of this type of music and so sure, the tracks were fine, but I had the impression I was listening to something I have already heard like 100 times. And so what I told him is like, stop trying emulating somebody else. So don't copy his style. Just find your own thing. It's like, well, I love dark trap, whatever music. It was like, well, then do that. Like, just go deep into that. Start studying. Like, I always tell this story about like somebody that discovered suddenly the playlist of Jay-Z, and he comes to me like all excited, like, oh wow, man, I just discovered the playlist of Jay-Z. It's like, what about it? It's like, man, this dude like listens to everything, like metal, classical music. It's like, what were you expecting?
Yeah. He wasn't just listening to a bunch of other contemporary rap. Yeah.
If he wasn't, he would be doing the same thing over and over again. Like all these groups, all these artists, like whatever it's in music, in traditional art, like you have to get inspired by other things. In cinematography, a lot of the cinematographers get inspired by paintings from the 16th, 17th, and 18th century for the lighting. And so learning a tool is fine. But if you don't learn like those things that like nurture you, then you're in an endless cycle. And that like feeds again, this sentiment of failure. I will never reach this or whatever.
Or a sense of emptiness, or like, okay, so I learned the tool. Yeah. It's something I run into a lot of times with people that, I do these open office hours and people are like, so what's next? I learned this and I learned this and I learned this. And like, what's the new thing I should learn to stay ahead of the game? And I'm like, what did you do with those things? So you learned Houdini, you learned X particles, which led the way to Houdini, and now you learned Houdini, and now you're learning Unreal, or whatever it might be, or like something else. It's like, that's cool. So what are you doing with it now? What are you combining? And I do think, I love the fact that the word practice is both a verb and a noun, right? Like you practice, you physically do something like it. And I also love how you always refer to music, because I find myself referring to like things that happen in the music industry and things that happen to athletes a lot of times to try to get us out of just motion design, because it's so easy to just get caught up in like the tools.
Sure.
But that word practice, right? Like you have your practice. Like what are the things you do daily, weekly, and monthly to nourish yourself or to inspire yourself, right? That's something you have to nurture it, and you almost have to have a system and routines. The same way an athlete would be. Like an athlete doesn't just like screw off all the time and then show up to a baseball game and swing 12 times a game, right? Like they are constantly practicing their swing. They have 3 people watching them to make micro adjustments. They're filming it. They're using AI to adjust it. They're watching games of other people, pitching that are going to pitch that day. Like there's a constant level of like analysis, synthesis, physical, like the physical muscle memory, developing it, learning how to make adjustments. Those things you have to do as an artist as well, working in the industry. It's not just enough to pick up the bat and swing when someone calls you. But I don't think there's many or anyone talking about that or teaching people how to do it, right? There's a lot of coaches and thought leaders in motion design telling you like how to make $100,000 more a year. And I love that. But there's not people also telling you like, what I do every morning when I'm having my coffee, right? If I wasn't talking to you with right now, my morning first hour, I drink coffee, I go into Behance, and I start looking to see what people are doing. And I collect stuff. And I collect it, and I have folders that I categorize it, and I tag it. And then what I love to do is at the end of the week, pick a tag and just see the 20 different people's worth of stuff and see what the commonality is between them across all kinds of stuff, across, photography, kinetic type, merchandising stuff, food and beverage, sports stuff, and be like, oh, what's in the air right now? I don't think people realize it because they're not looking. It's like everything's going flat white with like a little bit of a texture and lifted shadows. Why is that? And then I try to go and find like references from outside of motion design to be like, oh, what are other people doing that have that feel and why are they doing it? And you find the inspiration's inspiration. But if you don't have anybody teaching you that that's part of your practice, like the thing you do to keep yourself going, I think like you and I came up through like comic books or animation or film where there's an instinct to do that. like there's an instinct to kind of like, who's your inspiration? We don't have that in motion design. And that's the part that's scary to me, is like you say, like, motion design is an industry, right? Like we do have, we have rates and we have places that do certain kinds of jobs, and there's kind of a loose set of like job titles, and schools are selling it like it's this industry, like 125 years of film or graphic design, but it's really not. And I think that that's where a lot of friction is coming for new people coming in. Like imagine you go to school, right? It's almost weird for me to say this. Imagine you are like 20 and we go to school and we're going to plunk down $150,000 for 4 years of motion design education. You would have a huge set of expectations, because you're like, motion design is a track or a degree that's the same as graphic design or film or photography, that do have established practices and do have expectations of like the way the industry looks at you and the way you look at the industry. Motion design is still the Wild West, right? So people come out of like huge 4-year schools expecting that there's a ton of work, and the way you get hired has an established process, and you make a reel that looks like this and you make a website that says that, and people come calling. And motion design is not, it is still like super nascent. So I think there's people even coming through those schools that are like being set up in some ways for failure, because they're trying to equivocate, like, oh, motion design is just like these other well-established schools that have unions and trade organizations and manuals that say how much you should charge that everybody agrees upon. It's not that way, right? Like I talk to people and like, one day I worked for $450 a day, another day I worked for a $10,000 project fee, and there's no rhyme or reason behind it. It's just what I could get. So I don't know, that was another wildly sprawling TED talk, but I do think like it's interesting to me, like when people are working as artists but don't think of themselves as artists and aren't taught what it means to be like a capital A artist. It's hard for us to like say like, well, why don't you just like talk about cool stuff and why it moves you? Because I don't think like the language skills or the processes are like taught right now to people. And I don't know how to change that. Like I don't know how to make that interesting or offer that to people.
Well, like, I think there's two things. I would say, first of all, I will riff on what you said about like inspiration. It's funny because I do something completely different of what you do. I don't, let's say I have to work on a project, and instead of like going and see what people are doing based on those topics or bit, I generally run the opposite way, like really far from it. And because I know that in the end, like that will nurture me in an indirect way that is not like tangible immediately. I'm not getting immediate response, but that will like feed ideas that I would have never like stitched together.
Right.
In unexpected ways. And that's how I mentioned this to you. I designed like a campaign for a major bank, and it's based on gang signs.
Yeah,
and
that's awesome.
Nothing could be as far as gangs and banks.
Yeah,
but the concept works wonderfully, and it's used like as an internal way to tie employees and things. So, and so. For that project, I didn't went and see what all the banks were doing, because then I would have ended up with something that was bland, tasteless, the same as usual. The same happened with the campaign I did for the Red Cross, which I'm going to develop more in the podcast of the Team Can. But the thing is, part of the inspiration of some of the visuals that are in there are part of stuff I lived through, but another part is based on like Stranger Things. So the part where she's like in this like black world where she's isolated from all her senses, I saw like a direct correlation between that and what a migrant feels when they are migrating.
Right,
they are cut out from the world. Like nobody sees them. Media don't talks about them. People don't talk to them. They're pushed away, so they are completely numb to the world surrounding them. And also there were budgetary reasons. Like there was no budget to fly all over the world. So how can we represent such feeling without having a thing over there and a thing over there? So, and if I would have searched migration, migrants, Red Cross, I would have found like the usual stuff. Again, Stranger Things is like a pop TV show culture thing, very far away from that segment. But again, from seeing that and then like starting conceptualizing how do they feel? What's pain? What's loneliness? What's this? All those things to start to connect. And I think that's the reasoning I see that should be taught more.
Yeah.
You know, not as much about like the next big thing, because I always also say this, like Reese Parker, he does a living with a form of art that is considered dead. He says it himself. Like everybody says that what I'm doing is a dead form of art, and nonetheless I'm doing great. Like he has his own studio and people work.
He means like 2D animation.
Yeah, but
like hand
frame
drawn.
by frame.
Yeah,
hand drawn.
But what's funny about that is like, what I love first off is that like we're just in this discussion alone, you're hearing two wildly different ways to come to a similar solution, right? Like evaluate what everybody else is doing to know what's happening, so you know when to zig when everybody else is zagging, right? My perspective, like know what's going on, so you know how to be able to say like, oh, I've already got the competitive analysis. Chase Bank, everybody's using this color blue because of this. You need to do something different, right? Like. And then yours is like, I'm going to run away from all of that and find things that hook into the emotion of what you're trying to explain, and then bring that back to the center to find something that's acceptable to them. The conversation about like approach isn't even happening, right? It has nothing to do with Houdini. It has nothing to do with an After Effects plugin.
Not at all.
But you were saying something earlier, and this is the part where I wish there were more ways to just spark this like level of curiosity or interest for what to make. Okay, so I guess the thing I was saying at camp was that right now, and it was funny being on stage with like Aaron Sarofsky and Barton Dahmer, because they don't do this, and they kind of both were like, what? But I think a lot of people get told what to do by a client, right? They're like, I want this. This is what I need. Can you make it? How fast can you do it? And can you do it cheaper? And then we kind of just argue about how to do it, right? Like as an industry, like we'll talk about like, this is X particles because I can't find the Houdini person, or I can fake this here. And that's what we obsess about. That's what all of our conversations are about. That's what Slack is about. That's what, YouTube videos are about. Blender versus, I'm so tired of render wars or Blender versus C4D. But no one talks about like why. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you making this decision? And that's like a motion designer's superpower, whether it's questioning their own work or talking to a client. And what you're talking about is like, why would I do this the same way everybody else is doing it? What if we bring this influence from Stranger Things plus like a personal experience you might know about migrants' challenges, right? Like combining those things together with something else. We never asked that why, but perfect example. I'm learning Octane now, right? I used it way back when it was first version. I brought in Imaginary Forces, and like for some reason, I never kept on using it. I never kept on learning it. And in the last like 3 days, I've reached out to all the people that are known in the industries using it. And I'm like, cool. So this is amazing. This lets me work like the way I would be working on set, but with no one else. And it's super fast and easy to set stuff up. I don't have to have a gaffer. I don't have to do all this stuff. It's amazing, right? It's like being on a live action set. I'm like, who are the people that I need to follow, or what Patreon should I subscribe to figure out like how to make my stuff look like Caravaggio, or like who's the Roger Deakins of Octane, right? Like who's doing interesting things, talking about like motivated lighting and why they're getting this look. And everybody looks at me like I'm crazy. They're like, what are you talking about? I can point you to the person who tells you how to like reduce the amount of fireflies in your render, or like bring your render time down, or how to network your computers together. But like you have this capability, this paintbrush, to essentially have an entire like $1 million grip truck on your set in Octane, like right there for you. And it was amazing. Like I started just going down this list of things. It's like, man, there's nobody talking about like depth cueing, or how to feather a light, or negative fill, or like any of these things that as soon as you start talking to a cinematographer, that would be what they talk about. So I started just watching literally last night Roger Deakins interviews, and it was so nourishing, because I'm like, every single thing this person is saying, I can find the direct analog now in Cinema 4D with Octane. But that conversation is not happening. Like it was so awesome, because he was talking about the stuff you're talking about. He was talking about how he spends so much of his time like going back to his old like monograms of like photographers to look for new things to do. Because he was like, I couldn't do the stuff with a film camera that I'm seeing people doing in photography, and I didn't know how they did it because I needed 500 people. But now with a digital camera and with the ability to get crazy ISOs, I can start doing stuff and not kill my set, not kill my crew. And he's just rifling off people. And there was one moment in a video where he's like, oh man, I love Alex Webb, because he was using these gelled lights and he was doing all these things with color. I was like, oh my God, that's just like this one Cinema 4D person, but I bet they don't know who this photographer is. And they started talking about Brassai and like all of the like photography that he was doing like in Paris, like these super amazing, like tons of atmos, like tons of volumetric. I'm using Cinema 4D words, like Octane words, but tons of volumetrics and all this like glare and blooms. And I'm like, those look like Octane renders. Like, why aren't we having these discussions? Like, why aren't we pulling this out to be like, oh man, learn this lesson. Like, he's got this super, super deep focus. Like, all these things that were so hard to do that we could literally just like throw in a model, throw in a character, and just like go to town and experiment and play with ideas that at some point will inform a client. But, you'll be able to pull up this wealth of like knowledge and technique and reasons why artists are doing things. And I just don't know where to have those conversations. Like, I was going to like the best Octane people. I'm like, where's everybody talking about like the new movie that they just saw and like why the lighting from Mindhunter was so like scary, even though nothing scary was going on? Like a still camera with shadow where somebody's just the catch light from someone's eye is the only thing you see as they walk towards. Like, we're having those conversations about how to mimic that in Octane or why you would do it for a client. That's the stuff I'm hungry for. And it makes me sad that there's people who don't even know that those are conversations that they could or should be having.
Well, this cycles back to what you were saying about like sculpture, painting, earlier on, is what makes you a better artist is not the super brush. It's what you have inside and how you combine it. It's funny that you mentioned like having your own like live set, because that's literally what a reel is too. Like now you can buy a mocap suit for 2K, which is nothing. Oh, yeah. It's nothing. Like that used to cost like 200K. Now it's 2K. You can mocap in your house and you can be a virtual actor. So if you need to be a boxer, you can be a boxer. If you want to be like a truck driver, you can be whatever you are. You can wear the avatar and you can embody a character and make a short film. Unreal is free. The MetaHuman is free.
Blender,
you can borrow stuff.
Free. Like,
yeah. I mean,
it's crazy.
You can borrow stuff. Like we talked about this like when we recorded the first time. It's like these tools used to cost a fortune. Like Maya's seats were $150, like 150K.
Yeah.
Like a flame station was $500,000. And you had to stay overnight when nobody was there anymore, like past midnight. The computer wasn't rendering.
Just to sneak in and learn it.
Like just try to figure it out, like the alien interface and all this like spaces. Like now the point of entry is extremely low.
Yeah, you got a cell phone, you have DaVinci Resolve, you have Unreal, you have Blender. You're like, it's there, like anything you would need. But what's missing is the inspiration. I always call it three things, and you used one of them. It's like you have a voice, right? You're like, I'm going to use my voice to talk about things that are important to me, that move me or upset me or anger me or inspire me. You have a vision, right? Like you have an opinion on where you think things are going and where you want it to go. And then you have your set of obsessions, right? It's all the stuff in your background. It's all the stuff that you surround yourself with. It's what you wear. It's who you listen to. It's who you've read. It's who you are like so fascinated with. You have to uncover how they do things, right? You have those three things. And as long as you're stoking those things and exercising those things as part of your practice, like you're moving in a positive direction. It has nothing to do with those tools, but those tools are all going to be able to use those things, right? Like I hate the word taste. Like I've had the word taste weaponized against me in the past, where it's like, well, I don't know what school you went to. I don't know what your taste is, right? I haven't looked at your book yet. I don't know what your taste is. I don't trust your taste, right? Like I hate taste being used as a way to create, like you were saying, like elitism or whatever it might be. Like it can be used against you. But I also get into arguments with people who say like, you can't teach taste. And I'm like, I couldn't disagree more. Like everyone, like you said, has things that they're obsessed with or interested in. They don't know how to like explain why. You can teach people why something resonates with them and how to decipher that and then how to nourish that and get more things bolted in. So then you can create a voice that you're comfortable saying, and then you apply it to your ideas that you want to go forward, right? But like people like to lock off taste as like this like skill that you're either born with or you gain access to because you went to an expensive school. And I'm like, I don't agree with that at all. Like, I think you can be taught to develop taste and have an opinion and have like an idea of where to take it. But those conversations have to be stoked, right? Like, they have to be kind of developed, and people have to come to the table wanting to develop it as well. They need to know that it's a thing. You know, I look at a bazillion demo reels, and I think that's the thing that's almost always missing is like a calling card. You don't have to have positioning. You're not a studio. You don't have to have a brand, even though everybody tries to tell you and will sell you $500 PDFs on how to create your own brand. But like, you should have a calling card, right? You should have something that when I see it, I think of you. I remember you, right? Like as an artist. I don't think that's a bad thing to have. Of like, oh, I know the 3 things you like, and I know the goal that you have, and I know the tool that you love using. Like, all those things come together to be like an example of what your taste is, you know, even if you're not saying that or calling it that.
Yeah, you know, I'm very careful with the word taste because it's very subjective. And how many artists were condemned as like outcasts?
Oh yeah.
And then either from the like during their lives or maybe after they were dead, people realized the pure genius that was. And even if it's not genius, like, everybody has a voice. And I think we are in a sector that it is still kind of open to the fact that you can have your own voice, and you will find a pack. You will find a group, like an amount of people or clients or call it whatever it is, that will come to you or will appreciate it. Will appreciate you for that. And I separated this into like 2 things, you know, like, first of all is like the love for the craft. So, you know, don't be lazy. It's like, go deep into things because you want things to be done properly. That's one thing. And then there's like the voice part, you know, where, and that's maybe one of the spaces we're missing now. Yeah. Is a space where people can express their voices and freely without being bashed or categorized or whatever, or
marginalized. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because as Noel Gallagher said, like, nobody asked for Jimi Hendrix. Yeah. And it fucking happened. You know, nobody asked for Pink Floyd. Yeah. And that thing happened. You know, and it's because, of course, like, if Jimi Hendrix was sitting at his place and going like, well, I'm going to play like the Beatles because that's what's trending now. Yeah. We would never have heard of Jimi Hendrix. Yeah, exactly. Instead of that, like, that guy took his guitar. He was leg-handed, so he had to invert a guitar and learn it like backwards, inverting the chords, which is already completely nuts. And so that ties with the obsession thing you were saying. Yeah. So that guy was like obsessed with that thing.
Well, I love that you bring up Hendrix because in some ways there's a direct corollary to like what you're talking about with the Flame, right? He kept on going to studios and had producers who were like, no, you can't do it. No, that doesn't work. And then he would do exactly what he said. Everybody would go out to dinner and go home to their wives and their kids. And he'd go back to the studio and just start pulling levers, pressing buttons, doing stuff to where it's like, I'm going to figure out how to make this thing bend to my will. It wasn't about a tutorial. It wasn't about like a rigid tool set that did certain things. And he did things that everybody was like, I have no idea how that, like, how did you make that sound? How did you create that? And he just made the studio his tool, just like people like would go to a Flame and make the Flame their tool, right? And make it do things it wasn't built to do. So I hope you just always keep on bringing these corollaries to like the music industry. Cause like as soon as you say Noel Gallagher, I immediately start smiling. Cause like there will be a time where the two of us end up in a concert somewhere and we see Oasis together at some point. It's actually like a real thing that's going to happen. But I love that thing about the music industry. Cause I feel like whenever I talk about like athletes and how like, you know, like, athletes get very comfortable with failure in a way that I feel like artists have to, but they don't ever say it out loud. You know, like as soon as you get used to like, oh yeah, every swing is potentially going to be a miss, but I have to learn with each one. And it's not a failure. It's not a negative. It's part of the journey. You know, like working out, practicing, doing like personal projects are the equivalent of like going to the gym. But when I say that, I think a lot of times when people emotions on are just like, oh, sports ball, and they roll their eyes and they don't hear it. So I love when you use music as like the metaphor, because I think that's just a more universally accepted way to talk about artistry, that has a commercial component but a very personal aspect. It's just like an easy one-to-one where it's like, yeah, of course, like you write songs that are based on your personal experience. It's like, okay, cool. Where are the people doing that with motion design? It can happen. You can do it. It is something that can like be a positive besides just like giving you a moment of like breath from client work.
Yeah, and I would say even if I artistically I don't connect with the piece, I will always recognize the craft.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of artists that do stuff that I don't personally like. It's not my taste. But I would say when I see the craft, I'm like, holy Jesus, like this is very, very, very well done in a lot of industries. And so because you can feel the attention, the granularity into the detail, like they went deep into the process, and that's their voice, you know. And maybe it's not for me, but it might be for you or somebody else. And I go back to this like kid telling me like, yeah, I did all these tracks and this is like this and this is like that. And so he was trying to copy like 20 different styles. You know, it's like people today they're going to try to make a piece that looks like The Laundry, and tomorrow they will try to do something that looks like Oddfellows. And that's just like emulating and emulated. But where are you in the middle of all of that?
Yeah.
You're completely lost. You're not into the right quest. And then again, burnout, because at some point you start being fed up. It's like, oh, Jesus, I get one more of these. You're like, oh, now I have to do that. We all know the stories like of the client coming. It's like, I want a copy of this project from this other like company. I want the same thing. And I've been there 100 times. And to be honest, like I might have lost some contracts like that, but I go like, okay. And then like I propose 2 or 3 different things. And one of the things is the thing I deeply believe in. And I'm not choosing a style because that's a gimmick. I like generally, I first think about the story and what's the goal. And from there, the path is pretty clear to me. It's like, okay, oh, this has to be live action, not animation at all, in fact. Or this has to be mixed media, or this has to be stop motion. It doesn't matter. And so when I'm then presenting that to the client, so the client had their initial request, let's say, but clients are not, as much as people in this industry loves to say we have to educate clients. I'm very cautious with that because they know a ton of stuff that we don't know about their business, who their clients are. So we have to be very careful how we say that. And so I don't pretend I will educate the client at all. But if I explain him with the right arguments, why this is better for them, not for me, because I'm not trying to do this like my masterful art piece. It's better for them. And they connect with that and they feel that you truly believe in those things. Then there's like, I would say 70 to 80% of chances. Yeah. They're going to go your way.
We need to have a whole
other... but you need to have the guts, like tying back to the voice thing. You need to have your like strengthen your own voice and be confident enough to say like, you know what, I believe in this. With this project, this is the way we have to go.
Yeah.
And none of the online gurus and or like hustlers and stuff like that will teach you that.
Right.
That's introspective work. And there has to be a space for that, to have this, like, again, these conversations. And you and I like evoke this idea of being like a chaperone or like a Sherpa, and not at all in a pretentious way, like, oh, we are the old timers and we're going to show you the way. It's not that. It's just protecting that space, allowing that space to happen, so people can have these conversations, and not only young people, even us.
I think especially us,
even us. Yeah. We do have insecurities. We do have like fears. We are in a totally different spectrum of the industry where youngsters arrive and it's overwhelming. but we are the first in line as the older generation. Is like, what's going to happen? Like, what's going to happen to us?
Right.
How longer? I mean, I don't like the word relevant, but like, how longer will we stay on the scene? Are we now supposed to be doing something else? Like, all those things are unanswered because we are the first ones. And again, like, we also have to bring money to the table at home and stuff like that. So all those questions need to be also happen between us, we the young ones too, because we don't have the monopoly of wisdom. They might have a take on this that we haven't seen because we are too deep into it.
Yeah.
So and that's what I liked a lot about the Parvini fireside chat.
Yeah.
First of all, there was a no BS talk. There was nothing like, oh, amazing, love you get, like, all that was, he
It was the
cut
exact
that
opposite
out.
of that. Immediately. Yeah. In the
In
first 5 minutes,
10
that was
seconds. Like, if you're expecting me to be nice, forget it.
Well, and even nice to himself, right? That's what I think allowed people to lean in, was that he was harder on himself than he was any other place or any other person, which made it easy for people to be like, oh, I see that personality. That's me. But no one ever talks about that. I think it was doubly cool of him to do it because camp is a hyper positive, hyper safe space, hyper cheerlead for the industry and for yourself, which we need. But at the same time, it was like an antidote to that to a certain degree. It's like, yeah, this is great. Also, the lights are out. It's dark. There's fire. We're going to talk like cavemen for a little while. We're going to talk a little bit about like the things we feel in our gut versus the stuff we feel in our head or our heart, which is good. I definitely think that there's a world where we could have another hour-long discussion about just what it means to be in service. You know, like, we are a service industry. We are in service of other people's needs. We're in service of ourselves too. But I would love to discuss more. But I think for me, like, I spent some time at School of Motion, and I feel proud of things I did, but I also feel fairly guilty at times because I think we really did beat the drum of the discussion to be had is how to make things, and the goal is who will hire us. And that became the ultimate goal of everyone. The Bucks, the Odd Fellows, the Golden Wolves, right? Like, we did that to the point of like, it was good business, but I also feel like it did a disservice to the industry because it set up the one true path and the one true goal. And I would love to, I don't know if this is a school or a podcast or a Camp Mograph like place, but I would love for there to be a space where people could talk about why. And for people to flip the script. Lou Bones, who worked at PsyOp for a while, said something that stuck with me since I heard it. And she said something to the effect of like, you know, the schools and the conversations are all about who will hire me one day. Like, one day, who will hire me? And she's like, why does no one talk about who will commission me for what I do versus hire me to do what they do? And that just lit off like the dividing line in my head where it's like, that's the ultimate goal, I think, that doesn't get talked about, that it's not working at Buck. And that's why it was so great listening to Joyce and Ho talk in the second fireside chat about how she took huge leaps and succeeded, and then took another audacious huge leap and succeeded. And she went from wherever she lived to living in New York and not knowing. And then she went from freelancing to working at Buck. And she went from being an artist to being, you know, a CD. And there are still things in her life that's like, I've not made my goals. I'm not done and just on autopilot. Like, she wants to be at the Oscars. She wants to win an Emmy. She wants to make a film. You know, like, there's always that like, so who do I want to commission me to do my thing? Is maybe not the ultimate goal, but should at least be an equally valuable and valid goal. And I feel like that's what this conversation, if we're going to put a bow on it, is like, this is the opening to those kinds of conversations with people. Like, my ultimate goal, whatever it might not be someone else's, but it can be something beyond just like work at Buck, make enough money to stay open, right? Like, it does. And I think that those things are like force limiters on people because if you are successful, it becomes empty. Or if you aren't successful, you feel like you're less than, right? You know, like, redefining what success could look like or might look like within motion design, I think, is a really like valuable and important conversation to continually have and bring more people in to hear what their ideas are.
Yeah. And also, like, your success is not my success.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like, some people are very happy to have like just a basic income and have like an amazing family life. Mm-hmm. And that's their definition of success. Joyce might want to be at the Oscars and do a movie. That's her definition of success. We all have different, you know, variables for that. I really connected with Joyce also, her fireside talk, because I also had to leave my country to do what I want or what I wanted to do. And also, like you mentioned, like the evolution of goals. I wanted to work at Pixar.
Yeah,
when I got out of art school. And I didn't work at Pixar, but I worked in some like feature films. And I quickly realized, well, I thought I wanted this, but in fact, I don't. I don't want to be this thing, this cog in the machine, and like crunch through I don't know how many years to become supervisor, and then become, that wasn't for me. But I mean, that again, that's my path, and that's fine. So don't. I think people like see all these success stories, and they think they have to again emulate that. I come back to that. Keep imitating those songs. Is like you think that's the recipe you have to follow, and it isn't at all. I know people that were in the motion design industry left, and now they are excellent woodworkers, and they're having like the best time of their lives. Something in the way it changed, like a lot of us started with graphic design, then we went to web design, and then we ended up in like motion design, and like I'm also into film. It's funny enough that you mentioned like you talked about Deakins, because when again people talk about 3D lighting, there's enough theory in the analog world on set that will teach you how to light a scene instead of like just throwing aerial lights everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Or using HDRI as its like main light. Yeah, but that's technique based, right?
Rules, and one of the first rules is most of the lighting never hits directly the subject. It's bouncing somewhere.
Oh, like I know, dude, that's the stuff that I was desperate for the last couple of days, where I'm like, where are people talking about like bounce cards and diffusion and barn doors to shape light and egg crates, like egg cartons to like make sure that like they're talking about like, like the quality of light. The most interesting light that you can get is when you take a light and move it off axis, so that it's not pointing directly at your subject, and it's just the feathering, like that last little bit of the I think it's the penumbra, like that is like the equivalent of like magic hour lighting for landscapes. The light gets diffracted and bounced around as it goes off the horizon. You can take a regular light and just like turn it. And it seems weird when you look at on a set when you're like, why is the light painted like aimed at the background? It's like, because that last 15% that's coming off of it, that's where the magic is at. But like, and the cool thing is, like in CG lighting, you can have it not light the background. That in the real world is next to impossible to get that beautiful quality of light, that feathered edge. But I can just say, don't illuminate that background, and I can light that separately. Like there's so many amazing things of just like, like do you ever hear anybody talk about lighting ratios, like key fill, like 3:1, 4:1? You never hear anyone talk about that stuff, but you could, because there's almost a direct analog 1:1. Like I was talking to somebody recently about the difference between using like a colored LED light versus gelling a light. The quality of light is radically different, because it's literally like if you have a light that's just dialed into green, all that's doing is just giving you the green wavelength. And on like non-white people's skin, that does something very different versus if you take a like a warm colored light, like a tungsten light or something, and you gel it, right? That does something different because it has the full wavelength of light. It's just being filtered. Try talking about anybody that in CG about it, and like, what are you talking about? I just dial in the color, but it totally affects the qualities of your final image, that people will then go into comp and fight forever with a million different, like AOVs and try to get this magic sauce of just the right thing that they're doing. Or it's like, yeah, but it's in the lighting, man. It's in the thing that you stick in front of the thing that you're trying to create an emotion from. So I think that's a really interesting dichotomy, that the wealth of like you said, discussion that happens in the analog world for lighting versus just the ad nauseum repeating in the digital world of like, okay, three-point lighting, like key fill back, like people talk about that like it's like this wisdom, where it's like that's just the very surface level of like getting started, and the depth of conversation just isn't. It's not there. I'm looking for it. I'm trying to find it. I'm trying to like, is there a secret Slack somewhere where people are having these conversations? Is there like some mystery Patreon that people are talking about it? I just don't think it's happening yet.
Well, I think, again, going back to the chaperone thing, maybe we have to create it. So it starts to exist. And I will give you like another analog analogy that is even more analog than film. I went to an exhibition of a famous Belgian painter. And the thing that I found the most interesting from the whole exhibition was his notebook. So inside of like a glass casket was his notebook, which was open. And so you had first like a brief like layout of the scene he was going to paint. And then there was like and that was maybe 2/8 of the 2 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest was just him describing what he was seeing. And the insane amount of vocabulary and emotion that was being expressed only to describe colors was insane. So he was talking about like the color of the sea, and he was evoking memories. Like he was saying like, yeah, like the beach when I was going with my, like when I went to with my father fishing, blah, blah. And it's warm because there's the reflection of this. And like, I cannot retranscribe this.
Yeah.
But he was for one color writing a whole paragraph. It was incredible. And I could like reading it. I could like literally feel what he was saying. Like the cherry red thing on the tree. Like I was like, oh, I see it.
Exactly.
Just by reading it.
That's why these discussions have to happen, right? Because it's that practice that you have to build, and you to like convince anybody, you have to show them the reward, right? Like I had a similar example where I was in New York, and I forgot which museum it was. There, it was the final day of their Edward Hopper gallery, right? Like that had it for like forever, and they didn't have the famous paintings, right? They didn't have Nighthawk, but they had like a bunch of stuff that could show you like how he got to that painting, but you don't need to see the final painting because you already have it emblazoned in your mind if you're going on these journeys, right? These artistic journeys, these discovery. It's almost like you almost have to become like Indiana Jones, right? Like you can be on the box and like, you know, wear your teacher clothes, but some days you got to go and actually be the person out taking the adventure and exploring and learning it. Like it helps so much. But when I was there, I was looking through it, and they had one small room, and it was a bunch of like, I never even knew he did these magazine covers for like Architectural Daily, and one that was for like people who create boats, like for harbors and stuff. But the paintings were amazing. But I had just seen Spider-Verse, right? So in the back of my head, I had the second one, I think it was, like in the back of my head, it's like, oh man, there's all these options now that we have for non-photorealistic rendering, and nobody in motion design is doing it, right? Just the big boys in like feature animation are trying to do stuff that doesn't look like it's CG, like right out of the box. And I'm always looking for like, okay, well, what could that be? Like, I get what they did, right? Like Zipatone and stuff that feels like graffiti and cool, like metaphors for comic book making. And one of the things I loved was like how they would use chromatic aberration as depth of field, but it was basically saying like, take the CMYK plates and separate them, and you're getting this like cool thing it's out of focus technically. It's like using depth of field in Octane, but it has an analog. And I was looking through this Edward Hopper stuff, and he was doing these amazing things where he was doing really dramatic lighting for his characters, but the backdrops were 2 colors. And it automatically, like, if you looked at it, almost made them look like they were blurry because he was using like split complementary colors. Like they weren't straight complementary where they would like vibrate. They were like just off enough where it's like, holy cow, there's like a secret, like there's a code inside this that you could break and use for yourself. And I started to like putting it into like a project, and it was so amazing because I was like, oh man, like the book that they had for the gallery showing, because it was just a small piece of it. They didn't have any of these like 12 or 15 background, like magazine covers, because it was like not important to them. They're just like, they're almost just there as like stepping stones to show his final paintings. And I was like, man, like I couldn't find the book. So I went to the Strand. I had like an hour before I had to get to like New York airport to go home. I'm like, I'm going to go to the Strand to see, because there's this one book that's just about his early work, right? And I show up at the Strand, and I'm like, online I could buy it for like $300. And I happen to go to the Strand. I go to the artist monogram section, and literally facing forward is this book that I can't find anywhere. And I'm like just doing it on a lark for $15. And all of a sudden I'm like, this is a gem. This is like a like buried treasure that I now went on this 3-day journey, and it's going directly into my motion design work. Like literally I came home, I scanned the pages, sent it to my artist, and like, our backgrounds are going to look like this, and this is why, right? And it's like, it's there. And it was literally just taken from allowing yourself to go on this like exploration, this journey, this process of like developing your voice, developing your vision, figuring out what your obsessions are, and then find ways to plug that in to your work where and when it's appropriate. And I was just like, I was so excited about it. This is like 2 years ago now. I'm still so excited about just telling the story that I'm like, I wish more people had this, like I wish more people had this experience, because it's there for you. Like motion design rewards that curiosity so much. You just have to go out and like build up the practice.
Indeed. So Ryan, we have to start landing the plane because I think we can keep on talking for hours.
It just means we have to do another episode somewhere.
Yeah, we can do another episode, and we are in different time zones too, because Ryan is centered.
Central, yeah. I'm in
Central
Milwaukee of all places,
and I'm in Europe, so like 8 hours apart. I will start landing this by saying to people listening to us, if there is anybody listening to us, taking that part of the analogy that Ryan used about the penumbra of the light, that golden hour, which is very short, is a small part of it. But the spectrum, like when the light diffracts there's so much in there. And I think we as artists are the same. There's this whole tank that is filled with a lot of stuff that we get fed up like all day. Pay attention to that fringe and nurture it, because that's where the gold is inside of you. And I also say, like, I know Ryan does this already with his like real reviews and stuff like that, but and we said the same with Kyle, is this conversation needs to happen. So if you want to have this conversation, just shout out, like just say hi, send an email, send a DM, like your call will be answered. And I think we are onto something here with Ryan, also with all these discussions, like this space that we keep on saying that needs to exist. I think it's bound to happen. And I think that our industry and our field of expertise is in dire need of it. So I will start landing with that, and then up to you.
No, I love it. I thanks for the conversation. I feel like we started at the same place that we were when we were out in that field, like, listening to the crickets humming. But it still, even if we said everything one for one the same as that last recording, it still feels just as like powerful and important and like necessary. And I need to stress too, like we as like old hands that have been in this, like we need that like young blood moving into the industry as much as like we're professing you all might need what we think is important, right? Like that we can only reference Hellboy and Voltron and Star Wars and Wes Anderson films so many times before the people who we are talking to and presenting our ideas and trying to get along the ride for us like start rolling their eyes. So I'm just as much interested in the stuff that people who are 30 years younger than me are super excited about, right? Like I want to know what that like anime influence is, or what that video game that I haven't heard about yet, or the musician, like I want that. And that was the cool thing about when we all used to work in the same space, which is another hour-long discussion at some point. But that was the lifeblood of like being in a studio, was that you would get this weird mix of people from everywhere and all kinds of influences and all kinds of experiences. And that also created the voice and the vision for a specific studio, the makeup of the studio and the people. So I guess maybe some ways, in like summing up, like maybe I'm lamenting the loss and missing that. And that's why I keep on saying like these conversations, there's got to be a home for them. There's got to be a place. And maybe that's what this podcast is. It's the starting of it. Maybe it leads into something else where we get to hear from different people, and we get to have some people we don't even know, what their experiences are, wow us with, things we hadn't thought of, or look at us and point the finger and be like, you guys are totally wrong. You guys are old hands. You don't know what you're talking about.
I'm all open to hear it. That's the thing is, I'm totally open to agree to disagree or to be proved wrong.
Yeah.
100%. And that to me, those are healthy conversations.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm like also like completely like totally excited to know what young people are wrestling on. Like what are their goals? Like what are their dreams? Like I want to hear that, because again, we don't have the monopoly of anything, and certainly not intelligence or wisdom. And like we've been saying during this whole recording that you have to listen to your inner voice, and those things. Well, don't lament on the past. let's forge the future, Ryan.
Let's do it. And until another time in the future where we have this continued discussion, dude. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And, I can't wait to hear more of these conversations because they're much, much needed. So thank you.
Thank you for having me too, Ryan. It's always a pleasure. And I don't know, soon maybe episode 2. Who knows?
Sweet. Till then.
Take care.